Afghans are approaching the 3-year anniversary of life back under Taliban rule. Afghanistan's economy is plummeting and malnutrition is soaring. Afghan women have had their rights removed so much that human rights groups are calling it, quote, gender apartheid. In Afghanistan, women are banned from attending secondary school, working in most roles, going to parks, and going to beauty salons. A United Nations meeting in Doha, Qatar last month between Taliban officials and representatives from 22 countries faced criticism as an attempt to normalize relations with the group. The international community is torn between advocating for Afghans and engaging with the Taliban. David Sproule is Canada's special representative for Afghanistan, and he joins me now. Hello, sir, and welcome to Power and Politics.
Well, thank you.
So it's been nearly 3 years since the Taliban returned to power. I understand you're based in Qatar, but how, for our viewers, would you describe the conditions for Afghans in Afghanistan right now, nearly 3 years later?
They're very worrisome. The economic situation is still very fragile, with almost half of the Afghan population requiring humanitarian assistance. The Taliban Authority continues to rule in a very authoritarian way. They have denied women their rights. Girls are not allowed to go to school. Women go to university. The media has been suppressed. Media outlets closed. Journalists jailed, sometimes detained and even physically abused. There has been a denial of freedom of expression, and there's a lot of self-censorship going on. Minorities, ethnic minorities have not been given equal treatment. Religious minorities feel the very same way. The situation from a human rights point of view is very, very worrisome and disappointing, as is the situation economically for average Afghans.
I want to focus on women's rights. The situation for women in Afghanistan under the Taliban has been described as, quote, gender apartheid. And this has been quite a sticking point. The global community has largely refused to officially recognize the Taliban government because of this and other issues. But the Taliban appears unwilling to budge on that either. So how much progress have you made in trying to engage in with the Taliban over these recent years?
Well, Canada engages as necessary with the Taliban, but we have always established that we'll do so in a principled way. We have set down conditions. Some would call them benchmarks, and in fact, some even call it a principled position, where we have expressed our expectations to engage with them. We have told the Taliban very clearly that we expect there to be no retaliation against former members of the Republic government. We have told them that we expect their cooperation on humanitarian deliveries, no interference insofar as resettlement are concerned, their cooperation on counterterrorism, and most of all, we expect equal treatment of women and girls, and the girls be allowed to go to school. So we have engaged with them, but so far their policies and their actions have not met our expectations, and therefore our relations are calibrated accordingly.
So, Mr. Sproule, you say you engage with the Taliban as necessary, but I'm curious, what does that actually mean? How often do you meet with them? Under what conditions? And what are those engagements like? Of what do they consist?
I engaged actually last Sunday with their Deputy Prime Minister, along with like-minded Western governments, where we collectively expressed our concerns that I just articulated. I meet with them when they ask. I meet with them bilaterally, but not frequently. And I meet with them in groups, particularly of like-minded Western governments who meet with their ministers, their foreign minister, as I said, their deputy prime minister. And of course, sometimes there are bilateral issues such as consular issues, where by necessity, Canada needs to intervene on behalf of Canadians.
Now, I want to circle back to that, but first I would like to turn back the clock to June, when there was the meeting in Doha with the Taliban in the international community to try to make progress on some of these issues. UN officials described it as constructive. A Taliban spokesperson described it as a success. This was despite calls from human rights activists and organizations for states to boycott that meeting. Canada did not boycott the meeting. You were there. Canada did express disappointment, but in your view, what did Canada's participation at this meeting achieve?
Well, there were two difficulties that we had with the organization of this meeting. First of all, the Taliban insisted that there would be no civil society participation in the meeting. And we said no, that wasn't legitimate, and that they had to be part of the formal proceedings. And then they refused to discuss the issue that's foremost for most of our governments and the international community, that is human rights and the rights of women and girls, that those would not be part of the formal agenda. So the question came up, would our governments, our like-minded governments, participate? We decided to do so in part because somebody needs to speak up for average Afghans and the women and the girls. So our participation was predicated on that. And we consulted widely, and the decision was made that we should go forward because, you know, on human rights issues and those kinds of important items, if Canada doesn't speak for Afghans, average Afghans, and Afghan women and girls, who will?
So would you call this meeting a success? Do you feel like you achieved those objectives you set out to achieve by participating, particularly in light of the risks that this sort of engagement could pose reputationally and otherwise?
The meeting was part of a process where the UN has established, through their UN Special Coordinator, a plan to reach a political settlement in Afghanistan.
And did you make progress toward reaching that at that meeting?
Well, the process at least continues. The process will continue with the establishment of working groups on two subjects: the private sector and counter narcotics. And we will continue to press for a working group also on human rights and the rights of women and girls. And will informally work through our mechanisms to provide that and ensure that it's the forefront not only of a working group, which we would like to see established, but also it will be part of the subject of discussion throughout those two other working groups. For example, on the private sector, I think we have to get the message home to the Taliban that if they want to improve their economy, that's not possible if they exclude half their population from the workforce. If they want to progress technologically and economically, they need an educated women, and they need to provide them with those opportunities. So the process continues. Mm-hmm. We would like to see certain improvements with the process. For example, the appointment of a special coordinator, mm-hmm. Or special envoy to coordinate things. But we continue to press those issues. But it's important that the process moves forward because it's part of an internationally approved plan to try and come to an understanding with the Taliban.
But how concerned are you about the risks of engaging in a process like this, right? There is a risk that you could distract from some of these human rights abuses and the dire situation domestically that you've described by engaging in this process, and essentially it could be construed as providing cover or distracting from some of those issues. Does that cause you concern?
Well, the concern would be as if by engaging in these processes, the Taliban were able to achieve what they wish to achieve. And what they wish to achieve is international recognition and acceptance by the international community. But unless they meet the conditions for being a part of the international community, such as observance and compliance with Afghanistan's human rights obligations as in international law, they won't be allowed to become a member of the United Nations, to be accepted into the international community, or to have sanctions lifted. In other words, they cannot unilaterally be accepted by the international community and recognized.
And on that note, the Canadian government officially does not recognize the Taliban government right now. But as I understand what you're saying, there is a scenario where Canada could recognize the Taliban government if some of those conditions are met.
That's right. If the Taliban decided that they were going to live up to the international obligations, extend rights which are deserved of women and girls, of average Afghans, desist from suppressing free speech, give proper treatment to ethnic and religious minorities, have an inclusive government. Those are basic conditions that have been set down for their acceptance into the international community. But so far, we're some ways away from that, and this process continues.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time for this segment. David Sproule is Canada's Special Representative for Afghanistan. Thank you for your time today.
You're very welcome.